Great. Okay. I think we're working. Yeah, excellent. Okay, we're live today. I'm Daniel Burke. This is EIR News Live. We are bringing you the latest from the EIR Daily Alert, the Executive Intelligence Review. And we want to put in context this swirling world of contradictions where you have a great number of threats of total annihilation from the upsetting of the situation with nuclear weapons by President Trump's recent statements, the dangers of an imminent war on Venezuela by the United States, even possibility of intervention into Nigeria. These things are psychotic in a certain sense and absolutely terrifying. But the key thing that Mrs. LaRouche, Helga Zepp LaRouche, editor-in-chief of EIR, had to say today is that there's a consolidation of this new and just world paradigm that is emerging from the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And I think that if you're watching this program, you may realize, perhaps you're new to this, but you may realize that our organization and our media organization, our media publications, EIR, this LaRouche movement that we represent, we are absolutely in the middle of the transformation of this new paradigm into reality. And so we want to bring you into that process. And to begin with that, we're going to go to the lead to the briefing, which Michelle Aaron is going to be reading to us. So I'm going to go to her now.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay, today's lead, the overview by Diane Sayre, is titled With Faith in the Future, Act in the Present. The blogosphere is filled with wildly divergent assessments of events of the day. And that's not to say that events are not alarming or ripe with potential, but mortals that we are, bombarded by binary pros and cons, it's often easier to react than think. Perhaps this is why the great Chinese statesman Sun Yat-sen admonished that doing is easy and thinking is hard, and not vice versa. This is why it is so significant that Pope Leo XIV has revived the work of Renaissance thinker Nicholas of Cusa, specifically his On Learned Ignorance, and the idea that hope lies in the unseen domain, in the hearts and minds of human beings. The Pope has brought to millions of church faithful the challenge of heavy ideas, respecting the relationship between man and God, and between man and the created universe, which Lyndon LaRouche defined as the fundamental principle of human economy. It is no accident that LaRouche's widow, Helga Zepp LaRouche, founder of the Schiller Institute, is a Cusa scholar and is striving now to unify the diverse threads of the international peace movement with her enlightened understanding of Cusa's coincidence of opposites. All thinking people are challenged today by the gulf between the statements of US President Donald Trump in regard to his expressed belief that he is the peace president, having ended 7 or 8 wars, he claims, and the deadly results of his actions, such as the killing of unknown people on allegedly Venezuelan boats, the ongoing Ukraine-Russia proxy war, and the Gaza ceasefire, which Israel violates with impunity. We bear witness to a massive genocide unfolding in Sudan, horrific suffering in Haiti, and millions of Americans experiencing homelessness within the United States. Now the peace president has announced his plans to resume testing of deadly nuclear weapons, jeopardizing the health and security of all. Does this mean that President Trump is just a callous liar? Does he know what's going on? Is he being misbriefed or losing his mind, or both? Does it matter? When confronted with this situation, it is necessary to take a step back, or a leap up, as Zepp-LaRouche would suggest, to a higher domain where we can contemplate a longer arc of history and reflect on the dynamic of the progress of mankind as a whole, and on the beauty and goodness of creation, which will not tolerate actions that violate its principles. Somehow, with all of its flaws, mankind has managed to grow to exceed 8 billion people on this planet. This requires an embrace of scientific discoveries and inventions by society as a whole, and a willingness to function as a society, not a bunch of random, discrete hard balls. If you look at images from cities all over the world, from each continent, you will see people driving cars, riding buses, turning on lights at night. Yes, there are cities which don't have electricity 24/7 and don't have sufficient clean water. But none of this would have been possible if everyone just walked into a desert, jungle, forest, field, and decided to fend for himself or herself. The American Revolution was an inflection point for a break with the entropic colonial order of the world, an order which may be rightly called satanic, because it rejects the principles of growth and creation that are evident in the development of the biosphere and human progress. The colonial system does not create anything new, but seeks only to loot and deplete what already exists, and as such will always collapse of its own weight. Within just 100 years of the founding of the American Republic, the American people enjoyed the highest standard of living in the world and celebrated their achievements despite a bloody British-instigated civil war at the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. 10 million people came from far corners of the earth to tour the magnificent exhibits and see the massive Corliss Centennial steam engine, which powered all of the machines in Machinery Hall. Russian scientist Dmitry Mendeleev was among the guests, and Brazilian Emperor Dom Pedro II, the first foreign head of state to visit the Revolutionary Republic, tested Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. However, this was not an isolationist display of American greatness, but included displays of scientific and cultural contributions from nearly 40 other nations, and structures were erected representing 11 other nations' contributions to human progress. In fact, both leading into and coming out of the exposition with greater vigor was an international conspiracy to uplift the status of mankind as a whole, which drove the British imperialists quite mad and led ultimately to World War I and later World War II. Now the torch of development and progress has been picked up by leaders in the global South, and they are not going to give up their dedication to progress despite the bullying and pressure from the billionaire elites who think that they still run the world. Presidents Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping think and act from the standpoint of the long arc of history and refuse to be provoked into ill-conceived adventures. Despite reckless statements and actions from American and European leaders, Russia is steadily advancing toward its repeatedly stated unchanging objectives in Ukraine. President Xi is not going to squander the well-being of the Chinese people to make a deal with a puerile American president, but he will not make a scene or do anything to humiliate that president either. The door remains open to collaboration. On this 250th anniversary of the founding of the American Republic, we could give a great gift to the people of the world in returning to the sacred principle of the equality of man, and acknowledging that our young nation was able to excel because the contributions of geniuses from China to Persia and even London, who made fundamental discoveries of scientific principles that contributed to the success of our republic. Nicholas of Cusa was one of them.
Thank you very much, Michelle. With that inspiring statement given, let me let people know what we're also going to be showing at the end of this, which is a video interview between Harley Schlanger of EIR and Mike Robinson of UK Column. And they will be discussing the present characteristics of British cyber empire and efforts to block this kind of conception of the human species represented by Diane Stayer's editorial today. So stay tuned for the end of the program where we're going to hear this interview between Harley and Mike Robinson. And now I'm going to proceed with some of our slugs, and then we'll go through some of them. You can find these at eir.news. We're going to go through some of them. Many of these are only available to paid subscribers when you read them. And there are things that we're not going to review, which you'll want to see. So please make sure you get yourself that subscription. And in the meanwhile, subscribe to this channel and like and share the video. Thank you. So I'm going to start off with a short report on what's going on between China and Russia. This is by Mike Billington in the Daily Alert today. Beijing and Moscow hold 12th meeting of the China-Russia Investment Cooperation Committee. Co-chaired by Chinese Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang and Russian First Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov, the meeting in Beijing on November 1st pledged to enhance investment cooperation. Russian government reports Russian-Chinese trade has more than doubled over the past 4 years, reaching $245 billion. Quote, today, the Commission will focus on a package of projects for a total amount of over $200 billion. More than half of this sum will be invested in 63 major projects, 46 of which are being implemented. Most of them have to do with developing the transport and logistics infrastructure, metallurgy, chemistry, mechanical engineering, the timber industry, agriculture, and trade. It is notable that the list is being regularly expanded. The new initiatives added this year include vehicle manufacturing in 3 Russian regions and aluminum production in the Hebei province of China, the first deputy prime minister stated. So that's what Russia and China are involved in. And it comes to a real important point around the development of new sciences and technologies. China has accomplished a breakthrough in thorium-uranium fuel conversion, and we have a report on that from Mike Billington. China has successfully achieved the first ever thorium to uranium nuclear fuel conversion in a thorium molten salt reactor and obtained valid experimental data following thorium fuel loading, confirming the technical feasibility of thorium utilization in a molten salt reactor nuclear energy system, according to the Chinese Academy of Sciences Shanghai Institute of Applied Physics on November 1st. They continue, the experimental TMSR, which was built in collaboration with other Chinese institutions, is currently only operational, the only operational molten salt reactor in the world loaded with thorium fuel. The realization of thorium-uranium conversion marks a milestone in this development, providing core technological support and a feasible solution for China's large-scale development and utilization of thorium resources, of which China has abundant supply, and for the future progress of advanced nuclear energy systems. Molten salt reactors are 4th-generation advanced nuclear energy systems that use high-temperature molten salt as a coolant. They boast inherent safety features, cooling without water, they run at atmospheric pressure, and they deliver a high temperature output. These features mean the reactors are widely recognized as the most suitable type for thorium resource utilization in nuclear energy production. The ultimate goal is to construct a 100 megawatt demonstration project and realize its demonstration application by 2035. So that's pretty exciting. I'm gonna pass it back to Michelle to continue with material from the briefing.
Great. So we have two more things from China. The first one from Mike Billington is about China's plans to celebrate a major commemoration of Sun Yat-sen. I'm going to start from the end of the slug for the background. For those who don't know, Sun Yat-sen was born in 1866 in South China's Guangdong province. He played a leading role in the 1911 revolution, which overthrew the imperial Qing dynasty and ended more than 2,000 years of feudal rule in China. Sun, who visited the United States as well as Europe, was a follower of the American system, of Alexander Hamilton and Lincoln in particular, whose ideas played a formative role in his thinking and his famous 3 principles of the people, which were nationalism, democratic socialism, and the livelihood of the people. So what's going on now is a decision was passed to hold grand commemorative activities to mark the 160th birth anniversary of Sun Yat-sen this coming November 12th. Oh, excuse me, November 12th, 2026, which makes more sense so that they have the year to prepare these celebrations. So this coming November 12th will be his 159th birth anniversary. So a report called Sun Yat-sen a great national hero, a great patriot, a great forerunner of China's democratic revolution, and they aim to honor Sun Yat-sen's immortal contributions to national independence, social progress, and people's well-being. To forward his patriotic ideals, his revolutionary will and striving spirit, and to strengthen unity among Chinese people both at home and abroad. And this next chunk will also point to the next slug, that he is heralded on both sides of the Taiwan Straits. The commemoration also aims to consolidate and expand the broadest possible patriotic united front, to promote the peaceful development of relations across the Taiwan Straits and advance the cause of national reunification, and to unite the strength of the entire nation to the greatest extent, and to strive unceasingly for advancing the building of a strong country and the great cause of national rejuvenation through Chinese modernization. So the question of the unity between mainland China and Taiwan, we have our next slug, that the new chairwoman of the Kuomintang Party of Taiwan, which was founded by Sun Yat-sen, her name is Chang Li-woon. I think you see her picture there. So she took office during the party's Congress on November 1st, and said the party is confident in demonstrating unprecedented unity and committed to reviving Taiwan's economic miracle, and to usher in a century of cross-straits cooperation, peace. The title of the slug, New Kuomintang Chairperson Pledges Strengthened Ties to Mainland. So this will upset those who would prefer rough ties or no ties. And the Party Congress of the Kuomintang released a document reaffirming their adherence to the 1992 consensus, the One China policy, and opposition to Taiwan independence. So that's, I think we'll take that from those slugs. I think back to Daniel to hit on a couple other parts of the world.
Thank you. Okay, so we're talking about the danger of an invasion on Venezuela. What's going on? Here we have a slug from Diane Sayre. Is an invasion of Venezuela imminent? The target is Russia and China, says Douglas McGregor. According to Gateway Pundit, an Atlas Intel and Bloomberg poll shows that 53% of everyone in Latin America supports a military regime change intervention in Venezuela. They write, in the last few days, the White House has consistently denied reports that the decision to strike Venezuelan targets connected to drug trafficking has been made, but point out that USS Iwo Jima and USS Gravely are within striking distance of that country. This is after the United States, by its own admission, has lawlessly murdered 63 individuals who are alleged to have been seeking to transport illicit drugs into the United States. In an interview with Danny Davis, Danny Davis, former CIA analyst Larry Johnson pointed out that the first 60-foot cigarette boat that was blown up, presuming the video footage was not AI, had only 4 outboard motors propelling it. He said the amount of fuel those motors would consume in the long trip to Florida could not possibly be carried in such a vessel. There's no gas stations out there in the ocean, he commented wryly. In an October 29 interview with Tucker Carlson, Colonel Douglas McGregor reported that he had recently been in Washington, D.C., speaking with individuals who are just below the decision-making level, who explained that the purpose of targeting Venezuela has nothing to do with drugs or oil, but rather, quote, flipping the chessboard on Russia and China. According to McGregor, they said, don't you understand? By going into Venezuela, we're sending a very strong message because Russia and China have tried to build up and cultivate support there, and we're telling them that they can't do it. We're flipping the chessboard. McGregor had pointed out earlier in the interview that Trump wasn't getting a clear win in the Middle East or Ukraine-Russia, and he wants a win in order to appear strong, which he mistakenly believes he will get by bombing Venezuela and Colombia. McGregor was well aware that Maduro had already made a generous proffer to the Trump administration for development of Venezuela's petroleum reserves, which he in the Trump administration would urge the president to accept. McGregor also said that Maduro is not soft on narco-terrorists and that deposing him would actually increase narco-terrorism, not to mention the quagmire awaiting the United States military, if we are foolish enough to send troops into Venezuela. And now I have to give you the full report on the threat of an invasion into Nigeria by President Trump. This is from Mark Bender. As if the threatened invasion of Venezuela were not enough, U.S. President Donald Trump has now threatened the nation of Nigeria with invasion. The fact that these two countries are the largest non-Arabic members of OPEC has not gone unnoticed. If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns ablazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. I am hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action, erupted Trump on his Truth Social portal on Saturday, November 1st. He finished with the following words: if we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attack our cherished Christians. This marks a continuation and upscaling of the crusade begun by Senator Ted Cruz last month, when he introduced with great fanfare but zero co-sponsors a bill to place Nigeria back on the State Department's country of particular concern list, which Secretary of State Marco Rubio dutifully did on October 31st. Trump's ejaculation shows how little he knows about Nigeria. If he really intends to go into the country guns ablazing, he will be killing mostly so-called cherished Christians, since the Muslims are predominantly in the northern half of the country. So there you have it. This is the kind of idea that is running rampant at the moment. Now I'm going to go to Michelle to finish up some of the slugs we thought were worth bringing to you today, and then we're going to play the interview between Harley and Mike Robinson. Okay.
Yikes. And one of the mistaken or unfortunate ideas out there is that there should be a war taking place between Ukraine and Russia. I'm going to actually briefly take from a slug from yesterday, the Sunday Daily Alert, on this, which is on the alternative that not all nations in Europe are for this idea. So from yesterday, Rainer Apfel gives us that Hungary, Slovakia, and Czechia may form alliance against EU. He writes that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is organizing a new coalition of European countries. This is since the recent election, I guess, of Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babis. The three countries named will now have leaders who oppose Brussels' headlong drive for war against Russia and support for Ukraine. For time reasons, I'm going to jump. You can find the rest of this in the Sunday Daily Alert. But so those three nations are rebelling against Brussels' push for continued support for a Ukrainian war against Russia. They were Hungary, Slovakia, and Czechia. From today's Daily Alert, you'll see the voice of Imperial London, The Economist, pushing the wrong direction. The title of this slug, The Economist, clearly speaking for the military-industrial complex, sees progress in 6 more years of war. Aye. So Mike Billington gave us this slug, and what he's covering is an apparently unsigned editorial on October 30th, whose headline is "Why Funding Ukraine is a Giant Opportunity for Europe. The bill will be huge. It is also a historic bargain." So in the article, it first reviews all the reasons why Ukraine is losing the war and Europe is collapsing and bankrupt, but then continues to its argument of why it's so good that this continue. Quote, "The first reason is a financial commitment that can expose and amplify the Kremlin's long-term weakness. Russia has lost the lives of 200 to 500,000 troops, double the figure for Ukraine. It is also bearing a heavy financial burden on its own. Declared defense spending will hit $160 billion in 2025, and state-run banks have also engaged in an immense off-budget lending spree to support the military-industrial complex. It is true that sanctions in 2022 failed to bring Russia to its knees as some had hoped. But Mr. Putin's initial war boom has now given way to stagflation, with growth at almost zero, labor shortages, hidden bad debts, inflation of 8%, and interest rates of 16.5%. Another half-decade of this would probably trigger an economic and banking crisis in Russia. If Europe can demonstrate to Russia that it will underwrite the war for at least that long, Mr. Putin will be cornered." And I assure the listener that this is actual quotations. They actually wrote this. Continuing, Europe's second prize would be to become less dependent on America militarily, a necessity given Mr. Trump's wobbly commitment to NATO. Any long-term financing solution for Ukraine would help Europe build the financial and industrial muscle it needs to defend itself. There's a bit more on how this is going to help with finances, get the EU to issue bonds collectively and create a bigger pool of common debt, deepening Europe's single capital market and boosting the role of the euro as a reserve currency. They say a 4-year commitment would cost $390 billion, composed almost entirely of donated weapons and cash to finance Ukraine's budget deficits. Donated, that sounds so friendly. This is a lot, but still excellent value. Spread across the economic resources of all NATO members, not counting America, the bill for Ukraine is affordable, with annual costs rising from 0.2% of GDP last year to 0.4% of GDP. Okay.
That's great. At least it's affordable. I mean, nuclear war would be bad, if it were expensive. But if we could possibly have it on a budget, then then we can really fulfill the wishes of London. Anyway, thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you, anyone who is tuning in right now or who watching the replay. And please enjoy this interview between Mike Robinson and Harley Schlanger of the LaRouche Organization and of EIR, and Mike Robinson of UK Column. I'm going to go straight to it. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Executive Intelligence Review, and this is one of our new platforms interviews. Today, I'll be speaking with a special guest, Mike Robinson, who's the co-editor of the UK Column, which is an independent intelligence source founded in 2006, which puts out both audio and video and print coverage. By independent, I mean it is not funded by Peter Thiel or anyone from the PayPal Mafia, DARPA, or the British Foreign Office. For those who don't know, DARPA, which we'll be discussing some today, is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which has played a leading role in the development of the surveillance state in collaboration recently with Silicon Valley tech firms, and is at the center of the privatization of intelligence. Mike covers a bit of everything, but is an authority on tech infrastructure. He keeps a sharp eye on how the tech sector has emerged as a leading component of the militarized state, emphasizing surveillance, censorship, narrative control, areas which fall under the broad category of hybrid warfare or information warfare. For example, Mike, one of the stories you reported on this week was the unrolling in the UK of the digital veterans card. While the government department which runs the program tries to present it as a benevolent effort to provide efficient services by the government, I gather from watching your coverage there's a great deal of skepticism and suspicion of it, as another example of the digitalization of everything. So we'll be discussing these kinds of developments, including looking at the role of the European Union, which introduced the Digital Services Act, and the coordination between UK tech firms and the intelligence community, as well as the coordination with similar programs at NATO, the EU, and the United States. So today we're going to begin with a preliminary top-down look at what some call the censorship industrial complex, with hopefully more to come in future discussions. So let me begin by asking you, Mike, what do you see as the role of the UK column and your job as co-editor?
Well, look, the mainstream media, which is supposed to be the fourth estate, it's supposed to hold governments and corporates to account, is completely captured. And clearly there is a need for, as you say, independent, or as independent as we possibly can be, a need for a look at what is being done by the government agencies, by the think tanks, by the NGOs, by corporates, and to offer some kind of independent, objective coverage of what they're doing. And a lot of what they're doing is open. It's in the open. They publish what they're doing, but it's not getting the exposure. It's not getting the coverage in the mainstream press, and that's what we hope to do, and give people the tools. There are many people in the UK and Europe and the US that are campaigning on a number of different issues, and we hopefully are giving them some useful information that they can use as part of their campaigns.
Well, as I mentioned, concern is growing over the digitization of everything. The Digital Services Act is an EU regulatory mechanism that was introduced just a couple of years ago to establish, as they say, a comprehensive framework for digital services accountability, content moderation, and platform transparency across the European Union. Do you see this as a part of an information war conducted by the EU? And let me ask two more important questions. Who decided such regulatory control of the internet was necessary to protect Europe, and protect Europe from what?
These are good questions. To answer the first one, well, the European Commission denies that it is behind or the cause of censorship. I mean, this article here from Brussels Signal a day or two ago is talking about LinkedIn, the sort of corporate social media platform, which has now begun censoring content on its platform. We've seen censorship on so many other platforms, but LinkedIn is now starting to do that. The European Commission is trying to deny that the Digital Services Act is the motivation behind that censorship. I don't think it's just the Digital Services Act. It's also the Online Safety Act in the UK, and it was the UK and Britain which began this process of trying to regulate speech on the internet. And it began a number of years ago with a speech by David Cameron in the United Nations General Assembly, when he was the excuse in those days was that there was terrorist content from ISIS, and but also a whole bunch of other content that he was talking about that needed to be taken down from social media platforms. And that was really the beginning of a process. A couple of years after that, David Cameron was gone as Prime Minister. Theresa May became Prime Minister in the UK. And she and the Home Secretary at the time, Amber Rudd, invited all the social media platforms into number 10 Downing Street, where they basically told the social media platforms, you need to start getting control of conversations that are happening on your platforms, because this is disrupting narrative control. Theresa May then brought the idea of, well, what she described it as well, she brought this an idea to the G7 about agreement between the main G7 countries for key areas of narrative that they would then push out into the respective media, mainstream media in their own countries, but there'd be a common narrative across all the G7 countries. So this narrative control was happening in two major ways. One was central governments were absolutely agreeing between themselves what the narrative should be, and they were making sure that they had the mechanism for pushing those narratives out. And on the other side, they were making sure that the social media companies were suppressing any kind of counter narrative. And this was the major. This was around 2017, 2018, the major attempt to begin to get control of narratives.
Now, let's look at how we got to what some call the surveillance state, go through a little bit of the history. Elements of this existed before the 9/11 attacks, but that gave them a justification to go with what was called the Total Information Awareness Program, which was established under DARPA in 2002. And this was supposedly created as a metadata collection agency which could identify terror threats before they were launched. What do you think that the Total Information Awareness was actually designed to be?
Well, that was led by John Poindexter, if you remember, and I would just mention in passing that if you haven't seen the logo for the Information Awareness Department, which was driving that program, just go and look for it, because it was a fantastic logo of the planet Earth with the all-seeing eye above it, projecting a beam of light over everybody and everything. It was quite an amazing thing. But I mean, what it was doing was putting in place the programs, many of which were eventually exposed by Edward Snowden. But you know, that was certainly a program of surveillance that was ahead of its time in the sense that in those days, although Bill Binney and others have been talking about the degrees that bulk data was being collected by the various agencies on what we're all doing and what we're all talking about, the systems, the IT systems weren't necessarily up to speed yet in terms of how to process that data. As we've moved forward over the last decade or two, and we're starting to see the rollout of the AI infrastructure that we're seeing now, we're actually getting to the point where agencies have the capability to process all the bulk data they've been collecting over the last 20 years and profile people in a way that they haven't been able to do so before. Part of the problem with when they imposed this censorship regime on YouTube, on Twitter, as it was on Facebook, and so on. What they have clearly discovered is they shot themselves in the foot with it to some degree, because actually the social media platforms, if they want to follow narratives, they want to track how narratives are progressing across social media platforms, what narratives are progressing across social media platforms, then they needed to sort of relax that censorship regime, and that has to some degree happened, certainly on X after Elon Musk bought it, but also we're starting to see that on YouTube to some extent as well, that they're reinstating some accounts that they cancelled over the last number of years for various reasons. So, social media platforms themselves are great for disseminating information, but they're also a great intelligence gathering and bulk data collection gathering exercise for the agencies. But that only works if you can identify the people that are pushing out information. And of course, one of the things that has been relatively easy on social media platforms is to set up anonymous accounts, sock puppet accounts, whatever you want to call them. But as we're starting to see digital ID being mandated by, well, beginning again in the United Kingdom, but actually, although the UK is doing that now, a couple of other countries in Europe have been doing it for a number of years. But what we are starting to see now with the Online Safety Act in the UK is the requirement to associate that digital ID with your online profile, and that's something we haven't seen in other countries yet. So what the UK government is leading the way in doing is removing the possibility of anonymous interactions on the internet. And that, of course, makes the ability to the bulk data that they collect can then be absolutely pinned to individuals, and individuals can be profiled and so on. So we can appreciate the limitation, the potential that has on limiting freedom of speech, because people are unwilling to express themselves openly, publicly as themselves.
Well, and it's famous that Clapper, the NSA director in the United States, denied there was mass metadata being collected. But I think one of the questions that people have, much of this is supposed to be predictive. Many of the systems put in place, they say they're going to be able to determine who's likely to be a terrorist, who's likely to be a threat. From what I understand, there's very little success at that. I would contrast that with Lyndon LaRouche's forecast in January 2001, where based on his assessment of the overall security situation and the likely incompetence of the Bush administration when it came to economics, that they would trigger a Reichstag fire type event as a means of moving toward total control. Now, one of the interesting questions that always comes up is public-private partnership. And of course, DARPA as a government agency was very much at the center of this, but increasingly has pulled back and turned things over to private organizations. Is it accurate to say that it's increasingly that intelligence and surveillance is increasingly controlled by private interests?
Absolutely, and because the telecoms companies, the social media companies, were using equipment which it's no longer analog; it's all digital, and everything that's transmitted on those digital networks can be captured and can be stored. Now, this is one of the reasons why, again, the UK leading the charge on this. This is one of the reasons why there is so much angst within intelligence agencies about so-called end-to-end encryption. So, for example, WhatsApp, the chat applications. WhatsApp is properly end-to-end encrypted, which means that unless an intelligence agency can actually get control of the endpoint, which might be your mobile phone or your computer. There is no way for them to act as a man in the middle, pull data off the internet and store it, process it, and decrypt it. It's not possible at this point with the current levels of technology. Now, whether as they start rolling out and developing quantum computing, they can break those encryption algorithms, that's for the future. It's certainly not for now. But in the meantime, what they're trying very, very hard to do and what they're pushing back against is the platforms or any of the manufacturers implementing security schemes which don't have some kind of backdoor in them or that are not breakable in some way. So, for example, in the UK, there is currently a fight going on between the UK and Apple over the storage of content on Apple's iCloud cloud service, because Apple in all parts of the world except the UK at the moment allows people to use what they call advanced data protection, which encrypts everything on the Apple laptop or on the Apple phone before it gets copied onto their cloud storage systems. And that means that anybody that were to snoop that information from the internet between you and the cloud storage system, they can't decrypt it. And so the UK government took Apple to court and issued a court order to force Apple to produce some kind of backdoor to this encryption in the UK. But of course, Apple can't do that. They can't just break the encryption in the UK. It would be broken worldwide. Now, the US administration criticized, Trump criticized Starmer for this the first time they met. And then following that discussion, the UK government pulled back on this and Apple effectively won at that point. But the UK is having another go now. And so once again, for the second time, Apple has refused to allow people in the UK to enable that functionality. It's very dangerous in my opinion for a host of different reasons, but the motivation from the intelligence agencies, they're quite open about it. The motivation from the intelligence agencies is that we cannot snoop on who we want to snoop on if this capability remains. And just to end this point, in the recent investigatory powers legislation that the UK government enabled, they specifically say that in the future, any company that wants to sell a product in the UK, which includes encryption, has to get permission from the British government before it can be sold here. If they want to upgrade the encryption that they're already providing in the UK, they've got to confirm with the British government that they are allowed to do that in this country before they roll it out. So we're getting to the point where, you know, a country like the United Kingdom can effectively define what kind of encryption regime companies are allowed to produce, and the EU does this to some degree as well, and the United States haven't quite got to that point yet, but at least not openly, but certainly we're leading the way as usual.
Well, on this question, you've followed the evolution of the surveillance state quite closely, and they looked very extensively at the coordinating role played by the British military and foreign intelligence networks in shaping the US approach. How close is the relationship between the so-called deep state of the UK and the US?
Is there a difference? I'm not. I think it's very close, and I think that you know, the connections between MI6 and CIA, between GCHQ and NSA, and you know, and the Five Eyes, the so-called Five Eyes in general, is very close. My understanding is that you know, intelligence sharing happens between Britain and the United States first, possibly Israel as well, but that they're not formally or at least openly included in that. And the other Five Eyes countries are definitely come in as second best. So I think that connection between the deep states and of Britain and the United States is the special relationship that we hear about so much.
Well, we know that MI6 and Tony Blair's government were instrumental in bringing the United States into the permanent imperial warfare of the geopolitical mode after 9/11. And this involved using false flag events, regime change operations, color revolutions, as in the case of Syria, which I know you followed quite closely, and Ukraine. But it seems as though you mentioned Cameron. It seems as though he played a very important initiating role in this. If you look at that speech you mentioned at the UN General Assembly, where he called for, I think the first time, called for governments to regulate the internet. That was just months after the Maidan coup. And it was at that point that a lot of the whole argument of countering disinformation came forward. Would you say that this was one of the key points in the evolution of the top-down control of the internet by governments?
Yeah, well, look, a number of points here. First of all, I don't think the fact that Cameron started this isn't so important, because actually this is a policy that has gone from prime minister to prime minister, and actually continues under the current Labour regime. So it's something this is a policy which is being driven at a different level. And now you mentioned counter disinformation. One of the first times we came across a group or a body or an organization that was really pushing an anti-Russian narrative was an organization within the British Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office called the Counter Disinformation and Media Development Team. And that was run by a guy called Andy Price. Darren Boylan is another name that's associated with that. This is clearly an MI6 operation. Now, they ostensibly are there to counter Russian disinformation in foreign countries, but in fact, they operate just as much in the UK and as they do in other countries. And they serve two roles. They're there to support non-governmental organizations that are pushing an anti-Russian narrative. But the media development aspect of this is very important as well. You mentioned Syria, and that's a great example of it, because one of the better known media development organizations is called BBC Media Action. And this is a sort of a branch off from the BBC. They claim to be independent from the BBC. They're set up as a charity. They share a pension pot with the BBC, so they're not that far away. But they go into countries and they train media in those countries. They train journalists, they train broadcasters. And so the example that I always give on this is Syria, because one of their former employees, a lady called Juliet Harkin, talked about going into Syria in 2004. So this is several years before the so-called civil war began. So BBC Media Action went into Syria in 2004. They were looking for opposition figures, people that were opposed to the Assad regime, and they were assisting them to build their profile, assisting them with their media training. What then happened was that not only did they help develop the opposition to Assad in those years up to the so-called civil war, but they then had trained a number of people in Syria who then became the so-called on-the-ground spokespeople for the Syrian opposition when the civil war began and as the civil war continued. And so these people were presented without any declaration that they had been trained by the BBC in the first place. These people were then presented as local voices on the ground, speaking on British, European, US media, to give a narrative which had been predetermined by effectively the British Foreign Office. And so this is happening in many conflict zones and in many countries. And if you remember, there was a lady, an Iranian British dual national called Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who had been arrested in Iran a number of years ago. And she was put in prison in Iran for subversion, and then eventually ended up being released from prison and kept in house arrest in Iran. And she had been working for one of the other media development organizations that gets foreign office money, and that's Thomson Reuters Foundation. And actually, it was Boris Johnson who was, before he became Prime Minister, was Foreign Secretary, let the cat out of the bag here because he admitted that she had been there to train journalists. So the Iranians, in other words, it was quite appropriate that they took the action that they did, because they were seeing this as foreign interference, which it absolutely was. Now, she was eventually released from Iran and is back in the UK now and free and clear. But the point is, this is something which is going on all the time. And then when we see voices from in country on our media networks, and we're not told that they were trained by the BBC or by Thomson Reuters in the first place, and that we're not getting an objective journalistic narrative from these people, we're getting actually a very subjective British or Western oriented narrative, then of course that's how we end up with misunderstandings of what's going on in these countries.
Well, and this is, I would say it's applied generally across the world, from Britain, the United States, and probably some of the EU countries. But a lot of it grew out of the Ukraine situation, and is one of the reasons why we see the continued commitment of Europe to use Ukraine against Russia. But the whole idea of fact-checking, content moderation, countering disinformation was really, in a sense, a cover to allow them to pump out their own fake news. Now, one of the projects that you had a role in exposing was the Integrity Initiative. And I'd like you to say something about that, because this was really quite a devious operation. And it was, as a result of the expose, was supposedly shut down. But was it really shut down?
Good question. So that was a program run by a non-governmental organization. You might call them a think tank, called the Institute for Statecraft, and headed up by a guy called Chris Donnelly, who had been very senior within NATO in his previous life, and so on. But what they were doing was building networks of journalists and other so-called influencers to push out an anti-Russian narrative. Now, it was really a bit of luck, in a sense, that we jumped on that when we did, because they had set themselves up apparently with an office space in a place in Scotland, near Perth in Scotland, and it just so happened that one of our contributors lived very, very close to it, and he went to visit. He decided he would go and visit, and discovered that in fact the whole thing was fake from start to finish, because the premises that they were supposed to be operating out of were in fact a derelict mill that was partially demolished already, and so on. So that caused us to look much more deeply at that particular organization. And then subsequent to that, or around the same time, actually, they had their website hacked, and to a degree, this shows actually a level of incompetence, because they had documentation on that on a public-facing website, which was then released, which showed the networks of journalists and other influencers that they were making use of to push their particular narratives, and so it, as you say, resulted eventually, well, it resulted in two things. It resulted in massive embarrassment for them, to the degree that they had to shut the program down. But it also resulted in a charity commission, it's the regulator for charities in the UK, investigation into the organization itself. So that was another reason to shut it down. But did it go away completely? Well, no, absolutely not, because many of the people that were involved in it, of course, are still absolutely active. But other organizations like the Zinc Network, for example, have sort of taken up the reins and are continuing to run with the same types of narratives. But just to come back to your earlier point, you were talking about connections between Britain and the United States deep states, because of course we shouldn't forget, if we're talking about anti-Russian narratives, that much of the so-called evidence for Trump and Putin's collaboration that we described as Russiagate during the first Trump administration came from British sources, people like Richard Dearlove and some of his acolytes. So in other words, that whole Russiagate narrative leads right back to British secret services but we've got to remember who took that up in the United States was the U.S. deep state and some of their actors. So that is another great demonstration of the connection between the two.
Yeah, we put out a special pamphlet on that, saying that it's not enough just to identify Brennan and Clapper and the Obama team. You have to show the connection going back to Hannigan and GCHQ, where the story of Russiagate actually was launched.
Right, but sorry, just let me finish that because the other thing to mention here is that the same people that were behind the Russiagate thing were behind the Sergei Skripal, the narrative of this Russian agent being poisoned on the streets of Salisbury in the United Kingdom, because these two guys were supposed to have come over from Russia with this weapons grade nerve agent called Novichok, which they apparently spread on park benches and door handles, and somehow Skripal and his daughter didn't die as a result. Now they've been spirited away to somewhere, but in the meantime, that narrative is absolutely still a thing because 4 months after the original poisoning, a lady called Dawn Sturgis was supposed to have opened a perfume bottle which contained Novichok and died as a result. Now the inquiry into her death took place earlier this year, and the report from that inquiry is expected on, I believe, the 4th of December. So we're going to see much more of this type of rhetoric and propaganda in the mainstream press later on this year.
And you mentioned before the role of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or what LaRouche used to call no-good organizations. But when you look at that, you see how they're essentially private, supposedly, but have funding from the British Foreign Office and other government agencies, such as Bellingcat or the White Helmets, who are so important in shaping the anti-Assad narrative in Syria.
The British Foreign Office publishes spreadsheets of what they're spending their money on every so often. Excuse me, in the form they're published in, it's not very useful. So we have taken that data and we've produced a website which is fcdospending.ukcolumn.org, and there you can look at a list of every organization that has received Foreign Office money. You can see how much money they get over a period of time and so on. And the various graphs. It's just a much better way of seeing where the money's going. Now, it's only useful up to a point because, of course, the information that's provided is only useful up to a point. So although we know, for example, that the British Council is one of the biggest recipients of Foreign Office money, and as you know, Harley, they are dotted around the world, pushing out operating British soft power and sort of British narratives in all kinds of places. We can't know, there's no granularity about that. We just know that they've received £20 billion or whatever it happens to be in whatever period. There's no granularity published as to what the actual programs are that the money's being used for. But nonetheless, it's a good resource to just get a feeling for how much money went to the Syria campaign, or how much money went to various NGOs that we might find in our travels as we look around at at who's doing what in what countries. So it is in that respect it's a good resource.
Well, and what you find is the so-called grassroots movements actually find their launching place from the City of London and some of the British academic think tanks, RUSI and others. I want to conclude our discussion today by asking you to comment on the charge that is thrown out often in response to what you've just exposed, that what we're discussing is nothing but paranoid conspiracy theories, and that law-abiding citizens have nothing to worry about. How do you answer that?
Um, let's see how to answer that. Well, look, let me just. Sorry, I've got a few slides here. I'm not gonna show these, but I just want to go to the last one because I want to just show you. This is a report from a United States organization. If you just give me 1 second here, you might need to edit this out. I'll be there with you in a second. Yeah, this one. So this is from Cobb Corner. Now, it was originally published in The Conversation on the website called The Conversation. But the headline is Self-Censorship and the Spiral of Silence, Why Americans Are Less Likely to Publicly Voice Their Opinions on Political Issues. And this comes back to the point I was making earlier. The way that narratives are being driven at the moment is, without question, driving people towards the extremes of the conversation. And because of that, it's becoming much harder to engage with each other in a rational way and actually have conversations about what are going on. That is a mechanism in itself of censorship. And that's something that we're starting to see actually exhibit in populations. And because people are finding it much more difficult, they're finding it much more difficult to talk to each other. I mean, just for example, because issues are being attached to ideologies. If you're considered right wing, you've got to support Israel. If you're considered left wing, you've got to support Palestine. But if you're considered left wing, you've got to be pro climate change. So, and if you're a climate change activist, a pro-climate change activist, and you're pro-Palestine, well, then I don't listen to you because you're a climate change activist. So whatever you're saying on Palestine, I can ignore, right? This becomes really problematic when we're not talking to each other anymore, and this is part of. It's not just the fact that there's a AI or a group of moderators removing content from platforms. It's also the effect that the bombardment of content from the mainstream is having on us, that's causing us to stop talking to each other. That's really dangerous in and of itself, and it's a part of the censorship regime. We shouldn't forget that. Sorry, just tell me again what your original question was.
Well, how you answer when people say this is just paranoia and conspiracy theory?
Well, the point is that once we actually start looking at what's going on, we find that it's not that I'm saying that these people are doing that. It's not. How do I put this? It's not that I'm saying that governments are doing X, Y, or Z. They're telling us that they're doing it. It's just that they're doing it. They're telling us these things in a way which is not getting any exposure. So my answer, if somebody says to me that it's paranoia and conspiracy theory, I'm going to show you the document which demonstrates that it's not. And that's what I think we've got to do a lot more of. We've got to start being able to get the information in front of people. In a calm and rational way. A lot of the social media discussion, as I say, it's getting quite extreme now, and it's getting quite vitriolic. And so we've got to largely ignore the accusations of paranoia and conspiracy theory and just calmly keep pushing on, well, actually, this is what they're doing, and this is where they say they're doing it, and this is how they're doing it, and calmly explaining to people what's going on. People are getting it increasingly. So largely the people that are talking about conspiracy theory and paranoia are the people that are pushing the anti-Russian narratives or the pro-Ukrainian narratives or the pro-Israeli narratives, and they're pushing out propaganda actually, and perhaps that's the best way to counter this is to remind everybody that maybe you need to be looking a little bit more closely at what these people are saying, the people that are making these accusations in the first place.
Well, and the self-censorship depends on such things as the acceptance of the idea that if you don't like Benjamin Netanyahu, you must be an anti-Semite.
Right.
And of course, at this point, because as you're saying, people are figuring these things out, that means that much of the younger Jewish population in the United States must be anti-Semitic, because they're turning against the genocide policy of Israel. Mike, this pretty much uses up our time for today. I think we just did a very small dip into this whole deep ocean of how the world is being changed so that people are not capable of thinking through, as you just pointed out, thinking through what's going on. And this idea of pre-bunking, and you change the narrative so that people don't even assume they can figure out what's going on. I think we'll have you back for some more discussion of this because it's extremely important. If our viewers want to see more of what you're doing and find out how to reach you, what should they do? Where should they go?
ukcolumn.org is the website, and so that's the place to go.
Okay, well, Mike, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll have this up pretty quickly. And we're planning, as you probably know, to use the EIR platform to bring together experts like yourself to be able to give people an understanding that what we're talking about is real, and what they're hearing from the mainstream is the fake news.
Yes.
So thanks again, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Harley.
Okay, Toby, I guess you end it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Sorry, I messed up the last answer a little bit, but
Oh, no, that's
I hope
fine.
that was okay.
No, that's fine. I mean, the problem I had last night is I was sitting down to put it all together, and I realized you need about 10 half-hour shows to
Yes.
really get at this thing. But I was trying to figure out how to give you an opportunity to start raising some of the questions that are necessary. I mean, we didn't even talk about Palantir and some of these other leading items.
And we need to talk about Unit 8200.
Yes, yes.
Because that is absolutely core as well.
Well, we'll do it again, and in addition to the Manhattan Project, and if we can do something to promote the UK column, we'll do that.
Well, thank you very much. And when that goes up, we'll of course post it as well.
Great. So we'll send it to you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you both.
Have
Yep.
a good rest of the day and a good weekend.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.